Thanks to our sponsor Donedeal.ie, we bring you Business Bites, the best bits of that great business show served up in individual servings.
Donedeal Motors is home to Ireland's largest range of new and premium used cars. That's why you'll find cars from Audi and BMW dealerships on Donedeal. Are you looking for a 7-seater to accommodate your growing family? Maybe you're after a luxury saloon to make a statement. We have the car for you. You'll also find Ireland's largest range of electric cars to help you make the switch. Visit Donedeal.ie today to start the search for your next car.
From episode 128, Conor Skehan discussed the future of business in your town. Now, our first guest on this episode, 128, is a man whose contrarian views on the economy and wider issues can be read each week in the Sunday Independent. He gets right royally savaged on social media for those views I mostly agree with, which is one of the reasons I admire him. He challenges the orthodoxy and asks the hard questions that others don't. And he keeps going and going, speaking truth to ideologues. One-time head of TUD's Department of Environment and Planning, Conor Skehan is now an entrepreneur in his own right, so he knows about business. And today he's here to talk about whether there's any future for businesses in Irish towns. Conor Skehan, welcome to That Great Business Show.
Good morning, Margaret, and thank you for having me.
Oh, fight a road. Future of towns and businesses in towns. I know that Bobby Kerr is a big fan of talking about the high street. You're going to talk about the high street and whether it's fit for business or fit for purpose.
That's right. Well, as they say, how do you follow an introduction like the one you just gave me, except by being exactly what you predicted, namely a contrarian. And I'm going to begin, and a curmudgeon. And I'm going to begin by talking about one of the things that's dearest to my heart, but not always in a good way, which is SMEs in Ireland, because they are, on the one hand, the backbone of the Irish economy, and yet, on the other hand, they're extraordinarily unproductive, unprofitable, and sorely in need of a kick in the pants. One of the reasons that I'm so interested in them is because even though they've about 1.1 million people employed in them, and they've about 75% of the workforce, they only add 35% of the GVA. Not very good.
Well, to be fair now, hang on. Like, you cannot compete on like for like with the Googles and the Pfizers of the world who ship supposedly high-value items out of here and make it look like others are less productive.
Well, now, if your listeners could see me, I'd be in my pantomime mode going, oh, yes, you can. Absolutely you can, because all of the people in all of those other the foreign direct investment companies, they're all Irish people. They're run by, occupied by, and expanded by Irish people. The reason those people come to Ireland is always mistakenly assumed to be the tax regime here. They may come here the first time, but the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the 10th expansion they put in is because of the levels of productivity they get. So the Irish people who run those things are world-class people working for world-class companies, producing world-class levels of productivity. And I know, because my other business, as you would call it, is I'm the consultant who gets them their planning permissions and their environmental licenses, and I've been doing that for 35 years for all the biggest of them, and they're off the scale. I don't think I could count in one hand the number of times in that time I've been answerable to clients who are anything other than Irish people. So let's kill that lie before we begin. So the challenge is there, that the Irish SME sector are the brothers and sisters and wives and husbands of all those other people. If they can do it, why can't we? Now, get to the heart of what you wanted to talk about, which is the Irish economy. A question you seldom hear asked is, where is the Irish economy? Cá bhfuil sé? And the answer is that it actually has quite readily definable places where it happens. It has three main places. And if you stop and your listeners stop to think about it, they're actually quite easily recognised. So most of the people who produce most of the taxes and most of the value addition for Ireland, those so-called FDIs, they're all actually out at the edge of the city or in the countryside. A staggering number of the most profitable ones, which are in the pharma sector, are out in the countryside, in the deep countryside. The second group of people are the SMEs. The SMEs are mostly in and around settlements, main settlements, not so many in the country. And the third group of people who are economically active in Ireland are people who are involved in provision of public services, who are a gigantic number of people, and they're kind of evenly split, urban and rural. So it's very important to try and get your head around the fact that there is actually a map of where Ireland is in terms of its economic activities. So returning to the people that I'm most interested in, and I think you are too, which is the SMEs, our towns, our settlements and our cities of all sizes are where the action happens. And if we care about the future of our SMEs and we care about the future for Ireland being able to grow and maybe be less dependent on FDIs, we've got to desperately care about those towns and make sure that they have a future. I believe currently they don't. And I think most of the reasons are that we get in our own way and we are self-harming in them. So that's my laying out my controversial card for you.
Thank you. I love it. But explain more about how we get in our own way and who gets in the way and why do they get in the way and. We get in our own way in two sets of ways. The first is that we plan Ireland very badly. Now, I gave up 20 years of my life to be the head of the Department of Planning because I thought planning was so bad, and rather than give out about it, I went in and did something about it. You didn't do a very good job teaching it, did you?
Exactly. Put 20 years into it, and it was the biggest school of planning in Ireland, and planners and planning are part of a system, so I can't say I didn't try to do something about it, but we'll come back to another day why it didn't work. So that system of dealing with, because planning is about managing change. That's the only job planners have, is to manage change. A lot of people, when my daughter Saiv was little, she came out one day with me and I was doing work in Navan up in County Meath, and I had a big piece of paper with me and she knew roughly that I had something to do with making plans, and here I was with a big piece of paper and we were standing on the outskirts of the town and I was consulting a map, and we happened to be beside a place where there's a lot of roadworks, and she looked at the drawing and she looked at the roadworks and she looked at me and said, "Dad, when's Navan going to be finished?" And it gave me a moment of clarity because I suddenly realised a lot of people overlook that we use the same word plan for a building, house, and we do for a town. And the objective of the builder and the architect is to finish the house satisfactorily so that it ends up looking just like the drawing. Planning is never finished. Navan will never be finished. In fact, if it did, we'd be failed. And it's a totally different process. So I used to try and teach my students that planning is managing change. And the first slide I would show them was a dance. Lots of people at an opera, so it's or at an event, a ball, and so planning is a dynamic thing that's happening all the time, and we are obsessed with a planning system that's about trying to paint and colour in pictures, and not enough about managing change. So to get to the heart of your question, there's a huge amount of change happening all over Ireland, indeed all over the world at the moment, and there's a series of forces that are at work. There's demographic forces, there's young people, there's new people, there's people with different expectations and different backgrounds, needing and wanting to live in different places.
Which is the world always and forever.
Yes.
But so there's nothing new there.
The forces that are driving it are different. So I did a lot of work at one stage in my life for the United Nations, and I would find myself in incredibly out of the way sort of places. Unfortunately, my work was usually just coming in after a war or after a disaster. So you weren't always meeting people at their best. But when you stripped away all the awful stuff, people all over the world are the same. And I'd find myself in a very remote village in Nepal or Afghanistan or Sri Lanka or something like that. And you'd be talking to the people in the village, and they, if you changed accents and clothes, they were all saying the same thing, which was something along the following line: you should have been here 20 years ago. All the young people have left. It's only any good at times of festivals now. It's only any good when the bus comes in at the weekend.
Okay.
So, same the world over. And that is because agricultural societies are changing. Ireland is changing. We still have a picture of ourselves as being an Irish agricultural economy. It's a rapidly urbanising economy, but we're still trying to build settlements as if we were a rural people where the town was the problem or the enemy, and if you ended up living in town, you were a failure.
So the point of what you're trying to tell me is that we have gotten our own way of building towns or settlements that aren't fit for purpose and are in the way of business?
Well, in the way of a whole lot of things. So when I first came back to live in Ireland, the very first conference I was asked to speak at was the National Housing Conference. And I was given a topic, and the topic was the village as an alternative to urban sprawl. And all these high-minded architects and planners thought this was a good thing, and I was supposed to know what I was talking about, so I'd give them the talk. So like an idiot, I went off and researched the topic, going back to your introduction, because one of the things that I do is I try to make sure that whatever views I espouse are driven by facts and data.
That always helps, but it's not a usual thing.
No, and the problem is throughout the debates we used to have in our house throughout COVID when we were all locked together, the young people of the house, we used to tell people that there were 4 courses to each meal. There was the starter, the main course, the dessert and the argument. And the young people would always leave the table, going up the stairs, roaring back down, you and your facts. So facts are not friendly things for people's opinions. But coming back to our villages and towns, the talk I gave when I did the research showed that the village was a very poor substitute for urban sprawl, and that ordinary Irish people were making very economically and socially sensible decisions by doing horror of horrors their own house out in the country, because they were getting much bigger standards, much better space, much higher levels of construction. When they came to the village, they were penalised. They had problems with parking, problems with access, problems with space, problems with dirt, problems with noise, etc., etc. So they were actually making very intelligent choices. So I've basically spent my whole life trying to understand how does that happen? How do we get in our own way? And in villages and towns up to quite a big size, and I'll begin with the villages and towns, because I think if you can solve for the small, the big kind of solves itself. One of the things that most villages and towns are destroyed by is the main businesses in the town. Meaningful silence. So, for instance, I have a company that just does nothing else except give services to local authorities trying to plan towns and villages. That's all it does. And I go to a town typically. One of the first things I'm told when I meet the businesses is that, the place is wrecked, there's no parking. And they say 2 things to me. They say the council are trying to get rid of all the parking because they're trying to have these pedestrianisation schemes, and they're trying to give all the space that's left over to the hotels, the pubs and the cafes. Public space theft, to which we'll return another time. And they say there's nowhere for people to shop or to park, so they're not coming in to shop, and I'm going out of business. We then go and do bad things, which consist of surveys. And we actually go out first thing in the morning, look at the cars as they arrive in, and ask everybody, where are you from? And what we find is that the parking is all taken up by the employees of the shops who are complaining about there being no parking. That's easy to fix. You would think.
I was going to say, it's not that easy to fix if they're coming from hither and thither.
No. They're going to come in cars. They're not coming in donkeys. Yeah. They're going to come, but they have to have somewhere to park.
Yeah.
So the next thing we do, and I have been at this game long enough that I always make the next suggestion is if I'm doing it for the first time each time, which is say, why don't we park the cars around the backs of the businesses? Mm-hmm. All the spaces are too skinny. It's hard to get in, And I go around and look at the backs, and all the backs of all those towns all look the same. They're all these dilapidated stone walls and stinky sheds that used to have something in them that aren't used anymore. So look, why in a bunch you get together, knock your places together, and you can all get a bit of parking out of that. No, I won't do that. That I would compromise the development value of my land. I would.
Okay.
So inevitably, it is the landowners having unrealistic ideas about the ultimate value of their land. So often, usually in fact, it is the hope value of the main businesses who own most of the main street that are killing those main streets. You think, that's happening in Ballygo backwards. That wouldn't be happening here, right? We're having this conversation in South County Dublin at the moment. I've gone and looked at places like Dunleary's Main Street. Exactly the same factors are happening there. They have all the population you could wish for. They've all the communication. They've all the transport. They've all the wealth. They've all the opportunities, and yet dying on its feet for exactly the same reasons. So that's the one side of it. So the SMEs themselves are killing their main streets. The local authority is full of hard-working planners, many of whom I have trained. And the planners are arriving thinking that they're going to save it. There's a phenomena in my business, and it's called being loved to death. Well-intentioned people causing unintended consequences due to well-intentioned actions are a very common problem all over the world. Every village in Ireland and town is probably dated to about a period between about 1840 and 1890, roughly, right? Old, but you know what? In the bigger scheme of things, not very old at all. But they're all declared to be architectural heritage areas and conservation areas and anything else with a label you could stick on it. So when you go in, going back to the original paper I wrote, and say you did have a building in one of those places that you had a business in, you might as well be trying to climb Mount Everest in your underpants as to allow that thing to be developed, to be modernised, to have the backs knocked in. You're fighting the planners, you're fighting the traffic engineers, you're fighting the insurance companies, and you're fighting a whole range of people. When I set up recently, I got married recently to my wonderful Nicola Byrne, we decided to, as you said, be contrarians, like live, healthy fish. We swam against the flow, got an old house that was a shop in the middle of Malahide village, and I converted it to a house. the obstacles that are put in your way of trying to take an old building, it's the oldest building in Malahide, and convert it back are unbelievable. And only that I'm in the business, as the man said, and that Nicola is a very tenacious woman, we would have abandoned it. So the things that we were encountering were the well-intentioned actions by hard-working, hard-pressed, well-educated officials, but they're singing from the wrong script.
Fix it, please.
The fixing would be in most of those towns and villages to begin by the identification of the problem, to do what you introduced me as doing in the beginning, to tell people a bunch of things they need to hear that they don't want to hear first. Secondly, lead from the back. Get those people to make it be their own plan. Point out the problem. Invite them to come to you with solutions. The third thing to do is to change the categorization of a number of standards we have. And they're everything from building regulations and fire regulations about what you can or can't do in a building, and understand that these are special types of buildings, different rules apply, all the way through to how much of the building you can knock down or keep. Right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep the flame alive of the place, and a flame is always changing and always moving. And what you're trying to do is hold on to what my late wonderful friend Neil McCulley used to call the palimpsest. So you can still read the plan of, let's pretend it's Westport, but the buildings of Westport might be gone. All the cells in my body and your body, they're different cells every year. Why can't our towns and villages be the same? An amazing place that's vibrant and alive, but always changing and always developing. And what you're trying to do is to hold on to that pattern of continuity, of identity and activity. The activity is more important than the building. And if you lose the activity, all you have are skeletons. We don't want skeletons.
I could talk to you probably for the next couple of days about this, but we will be constrained on time. But I do want to ask, because you mentioned it there, about public space theft, because I think this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Discuss, please.
Public space theft refers to the fact that anything economic has to do with the extent and availability of a resource. And that could be land for building on, it could be metals for making stuff out of. Public space is an incredibly rare thing. It's where the buildings aren't. So cities are accumulations of very valuable land, and the most valuable land is the place where the buildings aren't. Right? And we have to have it. We have to be able to get through. We have to be able to get access to the places. So it's a very valuable resource. And the closer you get to the centre of a settlement, the more value it is. And that produces all kinds of things like why buildings get high and why nobody owns houses, or, as you get closer to town. There's very different dynamics. But the main thing to focus upon is its scarcity. And the things about streets is that streets are not just scarce, but they're incredibly special. So any particular street does 10 different jobs in the course of a day. So it is carrying all kinds of buried services underneath it. It is conveying people to the bus and the train. It's allowing the kids to get to and from school. It's allowing shop owners to have frontage. It's allowing people to get their post delivered. It's allowing the bus to pass through. So it's running lots and lots of services, which is great, good, complex, always difficult to manage. Problems begin when people do two things. When they start to erode it. So we're well used in planning to understand the building line, that if you build your building out in front of the building line, you're stealing public space and you get massacred for it. And you used to go to countries like England, which have much older surviving buildings, and you see those buildings from Elizabethan times, the way they step in over the street, they're basically trying to steal a bit of extra space as they go up. Happens the world over, happens in Japan as well. It's exactly the same thing. So we know how precious that street space is. Currently, particularly post-COVID, we're living in a world where people who are in public office and the people that supposedly are the elected representatives are delighting in giving away that public space to make themselves popular with publicans, cafe owners and hoteliers.
I so agree with you. I don't get it. And what's more is, once they take occupation of that, that's it, it's gone. They'll keep that.
Exactly. Once I saw it happening, I began to little alarm bells went off my head, because at one stage in my life I used to spend a lot of time in Brussels, and you go out into the small streets. I love the cafes and all the bars, but you see the jealousy with which they push out those glass screens at the start of every day and the little roofs over them. The important thing in Brussels is you are in so much trouble with the police if you don't push them back on the hour every day. They have had the rules because they've had 800 years of practice. You get that, it's like an all-black jersey. You get a loan of the jersey for the match, you have to give it back. You get a loan of the street for the day, you have to give it back. In Ireland, we're waltzing into it. Daydreamers, like sleepwalkers, giving away this land. And the publicans are the worst, closely followed by hoteliers and cafe people who are saying we have a right to make a living. Absolutely, you do have a right. Good luck to you. But you know what? You make a living in a managed society where we allocate resources for the common Good. All over Ireland, there are community groups who are fighting against this. We're currently having a new sale of alcohol bill go through the Oireachtas, which is riding roughshod over that. It's changing the ability to object in the district court. The planning system is colluding with it by endless adjustments to the planning legislation to allow people to serve food and drink and takeaways in the outdoors. It's an extraordinary thing that's happening, and it's happening on our watch.
Conor, you have got to come back. I could, as I say, talk to you all day about this. There is one final question that we ask our guests. Who would Conor Skehan hire in a heartbeat?
I already have. I married her, Nicola.
Now, do explain this. Nicola, I know really well.
Nicola is a
she's
serial
an
entrepreneur,
well.
yeah. And she started 11890 and Cloud 90 and a whole bunch of things. And she's currently running a new company now called Risk Guide that provides care for you, social media, online. So it guards your reputation with an insurance product. Amazing thing.
Will you come back to us, Conor Skehan?
In a heartbeat.
Great, thank you. Conor Skehan, thank you for joining us on That Great Business Show.
Want to increase sales, reduce overheads, and provide customers with a better service? Then use Big Red Web, the easiest way to develop and maintain your website. It gives you powerful business reporting, digital marketing, and automatically integrates with the award-winning Big Red cloud accounting software. It's a game changer for SME businesses. It's so good, the government gives you a €2,500 grant towards it. Big Red Web, e-commerce made simple. BigRedCloud.com/web.
De facto shaving oil, made only from natural oils. Nothing nasty on your skin.
That interview was first posted on episode 128 of That Great Business Show, which is essential listening to every town planner. For more great business insights, listen to the entire back catalogue of